This is part 2 of the lecture on social cognitive factors that influence learning and motivation. We've been going through the factors that, when multiplied together, equal our motivation. We've reviewed values and goals and self-efficacy. In this portion of the lecture, we're going to look closely at how our emotions and attributions affect our motivation. When we encounter a success or a failure, we attribute the cause of these results to certain factors. If we look closely at these attributions, we see them as having 3 dimensions. They are locus, control, and stability. Let's examine these 3 more closely. When considering locus, we can see the cause of our successes or failures as either internal or external. The cause is either inside the person or is in the external environment or external to the person. Examples of these would be, if the locus were internal, we would see it as things like effort or motivation, attitude or personality or ability. If the locus were external, we would see it as one's environment, such as no air conditioning in a hot classroom, or as the actions of another person. When examining control, we attribute the causes of our successes and failures to something that is either controllable or uncontrollable. For example, if we see something as being controllable, this could be our attention, our friends, and even boredom, which a lot of times students think is uncontrollable, but which research says is really more controlled by the person than the environment. When things are uncontrollable, that may be something along the lines of where one attended high school, which may be deemed more by where you live, or the professor that's teaching a certain course that you have to take. With stability, we attribute the causes of our successes and failures to something that is stable or unstable. Something that is stable is usually present, such as a personality trait like introversion or extroversion. With something that is unstable, it's more acute or is not usually there, like the flu or the common cold, that may interrupt your ability to think and learn. When looking at these 3 dimensions, locus, control, and stability, it's important to understand that they do not occur in isolation, that these 3 dimensions interact. Next, we're going to take a closer look at 2 of these dimensions, the first 2, locus and control. In order to better understand how locus and controllability interact, let's put them into a scenario. Think of a student who failed an exam. Mind you, the word failed is subjective, so this could be either the traditional F as being failure, or it could be something like a B+ or an A-. Failure is determined by the perspective of the person, and so when a person feels that they have failed, then they in fact have. In this case, the student may attribute the cause of their failure to one of these 4 interactions. First, we're going to take a look at the internal controllable interaction. If a student attributes their fail to something that is both internal and controllable to themselves, they're most likely going to attribute their failure to effort. This is an important factor and also highlights why attributions are very important because of the reaction that a person would have if they attributed their failure to effort. A common reaction to this type of attribution would be something along the lines of the student saying, I know I can do better if I work smarter, or if I use different strategies, if I exert more effort, or if I give myself more time to exert effort in the future. This person may go and seek out help from either professor or friends or study group, or they may know already what they need to do, but just know that they need to exert more effort when doing it. Ultimately, someone who attributes their failures to an internal controllable reason, such as effort, is likely to remain motivated and hopefully exert more effort in the future. Next, we're going to see what happens when a student attributes their failure to an internal, uncontrollable cause. Instead of attributing their failure to effort, what will happen is that they attribute their failure to ability. Ability is something that is internal to us, but is something that we're born with. It's seen as something that we cannot change, and so it is uncontrollable. A person who attributes their failure to an internal uncontrollable reason is not going to react by saying that they can work smarter or they can use different strategies or exert more effort. their reaction is more likely to be something along the lines of, I'm just not smart enough for this class, or I just don't have the ability to do it. This student may feel that their effort is fruitless, that there's no way for them to expand or change their intelligence or ability, that it was something that they were born with, and although it's internal, it is completely uncontrollable to them. Imagine how the student would feel. Imagine the emotions that are evoked by this type of thought, by this type of attribution, which are basically beliefs. If a student really believed that they didn't have the ability, that the results of their failure were internal and uncontrollable, this would likely result in the student feeling hopeless. The next attribution we're going to examine is when a student believes the cause of their failure is an external controllable cause. This means that it was something that was outside of themselves, such as the help of a TA, peer, or professor, but something that is controllable by them. They can go and seek help from one of these three. A person who has an external controllable attribution for their failure may feel that they can do better if they seek help. If they seek help which is under their control, then this could potentially increase their grade or their learning outcome. A person who has this type of belief or attribution is going to still feel more in control because they see the cause of their failure as something in their control. This will result in less anger and hopelessness. The last attribution a student can have when they fail is the external uncontrollable attribution. This can result in the student just feeling unlucky or that it just wasn't in their fate. Because the belief here is that the cause of their failure is completely foreign and uncontrollable to them, the reaction of the student is going to be that of anger. What could I have done? The test questions were unfair. The student here may feel as a victim of their circumstance. It just wasn't in the cards for them. In turn, because of the lack of controllability here, the student doesn't feel that any effort or focus or strategizing for the future would make any difference, and really not exert any control or effort over their circumstances or goals. So when we look at these two dimensions together, locus and controllability, a person who generally sees their successes and failures as internal and controllable is said to have an internal locus of control. This person generally feels in control and in power of their decisions, of their goals, of the circumstances of their life. This results in increased effort and a feeling of empowerment over their circumstances, over the factors that contribute to their learning and motivation. On the contrary, a person who generally sees their successes or failures as external and uncontrollable is said to have an external locus of control. This is the feeling of being a victim of their circumstances, of not being in control of the factors that impact their life. Specifically here, we're talking about our learning and motivation. This person generally feels like a victim. This person may not take responsibility or accountability for their failures because they attribute the causes of these as being beyond their control. These types of attributions may result in emotions such as anger, poor self-esteem or self-worth, and powerlessness. Before we leave this slide, take a look at the middle column. In the next slide, we're going to take a closer look at this column and examine what happened when a student attributes their failure to either an internal controllable cause or an internal uncontrollable cause. You see here that we're going to be focusing on effort and ability. So when a student encounters failure, they can attribute this failure to being caused by a lack of ability. If this occurs, what will happen is that the student will feel that this was an uncontrollable cause for their failure, which leads to the belief that it's not only not controlled by them, but that they're not responsible for the failure that happened. This can lead to feelings of shame and embarrassment. As a result, the student can withdraw, either withdraw from exerting effort, withdraw from contributing to class, withdraw from showing up to class or participating when they are there, or withdraw from classmates that may ask them how they're doing in the class. As a result, their performance in this class or with assignments would decline. On the other hand, when a student encounters failure and they attribute it to the lack of effort, what happens is that the student knows that their effort is under their control. This leads them to the belief that they are responsible for their failure, which will not make them feel good, but will make them feel guilty as opposed to shamed. As a result of this guilt and feeling of responsibility, their engagement would increase, which would ultimately improve their performance. If the student is unsatisfied with their learning outcome and they attribute the cause to a lack of effort, they will ultimately feel responsible to improve their performance by controlling the amount of effort they exert. It's very important to be aware of the attributions we make for our successes and failures, but especially our failures. As we stated in Part 1, even students that have a performance orientation tend to do well when they're successful. It's when we encounter failure that the beliefs, attitudes, and emotions that we have can come into question. So why are attributions important in college? As a college student, we are continually making attributions regarding our success and failure on any task that we're engaged in, whether it's in a class, in a study group, alone while we're studying, with a performance, with a paper being due, with a presentation, or on the field. We are continually making these attributions, but we especially make them about failure. And these attributions can bring about feelings of shame and embarrassment, humiliation. So as the CEOs of your college career, it's very important that when you encounter failure, that you take the time to reflect on how you contributed to the failure, on what your responsibility is. And this is not to punish yourself or beat yourself up, but it's so that you have control, so that you are not the victim of your failure, and so that you can exert effort and see your effort as fruitful, so that in the future you can improve. Before we move on to our final thoughts, we're going to take one last look at our formula. Motivation equals our values and goals, multiplied by our self-efficacy, multiplied by our emotions or attributions. It is important to remember that these social cognitive factors of motivation are really looking at motivation from an internal perspective. When we have low motivation and you want to increase your motivation, these are the factors that you need to attend to. Are your goals aligned with your values? Do you have long-term goals or just aspirations? Are your daily tasks or performance goals in line with what your long-term goal is? Do you need a self-efficacy boost? Or are you attributing your failure to something that you can control? When you have a lack of motivation, it's important to come back and revisit these factors so that you can increase and have control over your motivation. Finally, as you're learning this week, reflect on these questions. What do you value above all else? Are your goals aligned with these values? Is what you do on a daily basis aligned with your future or long-term goals? Are you focused on mastery of your learning or on comparing your successes and failures to others? When you encounter failure, what do you attribute it to? Are you able to focus on effort and improvement?